Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to have a conversation with Dividend Assets Capital and Don Luskin. Really want to thank our attendees for attending. I think we had a good turnout from what we could see today, so thank you for taking that time. As many of you know, Don is the CIO of Trend Macro, a firm he founded in 2001. And believe it or not, this is Don's third conversation with us, and we're very honored and pleased that he's here today. What I love about Don's background, and I always share it, I love the fact that he traded the first ever stock option on the New York Stock Exchange. I just think that is the coolest stat that any individual can have. So I love sharing that about Don's background. Um, but not only is today our third conversation with Don, but they're always great. They're always informative. They're always energetic, and they always provide great information and details for our client base. But today's a little different, though. Today's a little special. Today is the first call in a series of calls that we have scheduled for 2025 with the professional resources and the acumen that we rely on to serve our clients and to meet the needs of our clients. So there'll be more of these to come throughout 2025. So should be a great conversation. There will be opportunity to submit questions along the way. And we had a number of questions submitted for today's call. But we have plenty to discuss, from tariffs to inflation to earnings growth, recession concerns, immigration, U.S. debt. We have plenty to talk about in the next 45 minutes. With that, I'll turn the call over to Marc. Marc is our Chief Investment Officer, as many of you know. He leads the efforts around within our firm around our dividend growth, our equity income, and our North American midstream energy portfolios. And Marc will do a great job today. So with that, I turn this over to Marc and Don, and you guys can go from there.
Thank you, Jim. Again, I want to welcome all the attendees and certainly our esteemed guest, Don Luskin. Don, I wanted to spin the subject wheel here because there's so many topics that are really on the forefront today. And so maybe, give it to you to say, hey, how would you like to, which one would you like to pick from the multitude that we're going to discuss today?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark, and Jim for having me here, and thank all of you in the audience for attending. And I think this is going to be a great session. Um, I'm happy to start wherever you want, Mark. I'll just make just venture to say that we have a new president who was sworn in less than a month ago. And what's happened so far in his administration is, it's a volume of initiatives and accomplishments that sometimes don't even happen in the whole 4 years of a president's administration. So we've got a lot of stuff happening. Some of it is stuff that lives in the domain of the great American culture wars that have been going on all our lives, and that's fine. But we're all gathered here today as investors who want to know how everything that happens in the world, including what Trump does, affects our portfolios and affects the economy that affects our portfolios. And there's a lot of moving parts. Tariffs have been put in place. More are probably going to be announced in a couple hours. We're getting that hint from the White House. We face the expiration of many provisions of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at midnight on the last day of this year. And that will be, depending on what state you live in, that will be pretty much a tax hike for every American. So that's a big deal. And that will happen even if nobody in Washington, including Donald Trump, does anything at all. They're just going to expire. So somebody has to go to the trouble of extending them. And that has to be done through a very narrowly divided Congress. Even though our president is, very much an activist, Congress is very narrowly divided. It's hard to do stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of it lives in the realm of what if. We don't know if it's going to happen. We don't really know what tariffs are going to be put in place. We don't really know what their effect will be, right? So there are a lot of what ifs, but there are a few things that aren't what ifs. There are few things we know for sure about Trumponomics. So I would suggest as a way of beginning that we sort of divide the world in terms of what we know for sure and what's maybe. And we can talk about the impact of what we know for sure, and we can talk about the potential impact of the maybes. Chance favors the prepared mind. But let's not go crazy and just assume that this, that, and the other policy are going to be put in place. And let's not further assume that we know what the effect of those policies are going to be. So may I make a suggestion that we start with what we know?
I think it's a terrific idea. I mean, so maybe discussing what we know right now. So the initial policy on tariffs, since they're the topic du jour here, is we picked our closest trading partners right now of between Canada and Mexico. And so we do the most trade between these countries, part of NAFTA. Maybe talk about the strategy there of, addressing those first, maybe prior to China and Europe. And then, what do you think are going to be the net impacts of that? Because there's certainly, there's been a sort of immediate response to that, but, we haven't really heard you're seeing the actual manifestation because that decision kind of got kicked down the road for a month, right? So what do you think are the likely outcomes of that and how could
Right.
affect?
Okay, good. Well, that's a great place to start. So tariffs are many things. Now, we're all economically sophisticated people, and we've all been steeped in the traditions of a very, free market economy, an economy that ever since the United States rose to imperial greatness by, saving the world in World War II and after the 80 years ever after, we've been the economic engine of the world, the policeman of the world. It's been quite an 80 years. And as a result of that, it hasn't been perfect and the job isn't done, but the world has been rebuilt from the rubble of World War II. And there's been an efflorescence of human wealth and human liberty, the likes of which have simply never been seen in any year in the entire history of the human race. I mean, we are living, and I hope it's going to continue to get better, but everybody stop, take a breath, realize that we are in the best world the world has ever had. And part of that is because of America's advocacy of free trade. Now, when you have free trade, then all 8 billion people in the world can exchange with each other at market prices, which means voluntary prices based on the judgment of every buyer and every seller, what you're best at. So if there's somebody in some town in China that's better at making a widget than somebody in a town in Ohio at making a substantially identical widget, well, why shouldn't you buy it from China? Fair question. So that's the argument about free trade. It's worked so far. The problem is that widget in China is really not better. It's just cheaper. Well, that makes it better to you, right? If there was two identical things, you'd always pick the cheaper one. But why is the widget in China cheaper? Well, it is cheaper because labor is incredibly cheap in China. It's not as cheap today as it was 25 years ago when this all started, but it's still 2 to 1. China also substantially does not have any environmental regulations. China is willing to build out its industrial base by doing the kinds of things we were willing to do, throughout most of the 20th century until the environmental movement began. So China brings on a new coal-fired power plant every couple of weeks. We don't do coal here anymore, man. And these factories in China that produce the widgets so cheaply, well, it turns out that producing widgets results in this toxic waste that comes out of the back of the widget factory. And in China, you just dump it in the river. And that's what we used to do in the United States in 1950. We just don't do it in the United States anymore, right? So in every sense, it's harder and more expensive to do things here than it is there. So we buy it from them. So here's the problem. The problem is we've lost our ability to manufacture in this country. Our factories have all rusted away and been bulldozed. And we face a world where if something like say a tariff policy or some other trade policy were to do something fairly or unfairly in order to bring manufacturing back to the United States, who would do it? What factory would you do it in? Oh, you want to just build a new widget factory in Columbus, Ohio? Oh, great. Just fill out these 10,000 forms and come up with 9 environmental impact statements, and we'll let you know in 5 years if you can build that factory. And who are going to get to work in that factory in 5 years? The unemployment rate's 4%. There are no workers. Uh, this is a problem. This is a problem. So what exactly are these tariffs supposed to do? Are they supposed to bring manufacturing back to the United States by making foreign goods more expensive? So we'll have a equal playing field. Goods from China aren't just more expensive than goods from Ohio. Goods from China exist. Goods from Ohio don't exist. So this is a real problem with tariffs. Now, in the case of the Canada and Mexico tariffs, it's not about raising the effective price of a foreign good to U.S. buyers so that they'll hopefully go to a domestic good if it only existed. This is using tariffs just simply as a weapon.
Right.
It's diplomatic. It's not economic at all. So, you said, that we are, you're correct that Mexico and Canada are our closest trading partners. They are pretty much tied for number one and number two. China is number three, but Canada and Mexico are each more business to do with the United States than China. We had, as you said, we had NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, during Trump's first administration. He replaced that with what ended up being called the United States, Mexico, Canada Free Trade Agreement. And so when Trump complains about how terribly unfair our trading relationship is with these countries, somebody just ought to tap him on the shoulder and say, "Oh, wait! No, you negotiated this yourself 4 years ago, so don't act surprised. I think I see your signature on that." So there is that, but that's not what this is about. So go to the White House website, read the executive orders, read the fact sheets. Doesn't even mention trade. It's that China and Canada and Mexico are ports of entry through which fentanyl comes into this country.
Mhm.
And a dose of fentanyl, almost smaller than your eye can see, can kill you.
Right.
It's a serious problem.
That's right.
And so Trump is saying, okay, I've got this threat. And the threat is that Mexico, I'll make it so that cars manufactured there, no one will want to buy them in this country. Or, or you can crack down on your cartels and stop the fentanyl. Your call.
That's right.
Well, what would you rather he do? Threaten them with nuclear weapons?
That's
No,
right.
that would be way worse.
That's right.
So it's not about tariffs.
That's right.
So what Trump is going to do later today, supposedly, is announce a program. It's actually very clever. He calls them reciprocal tariffs. The idea is whatever counterpart country you are, whether it's Malaysia or Singapore or Mexico or Canada or China or ABC, if you put a 50% tariff on American cars, we're going to put a 50% tariff on your cars.
Right.
And if you take that tariff off, we'll take our tariff off too.
That's
We
right.
just want it to be fair.
That's right.
So it shakes up the apple cart for sure. But what he's basically saying, it's the most free trade thing any president has ever said, when you think about it, right? He's saying, you go first, because you're the ones with the high tariffs. Just go to the World Trade Organization, the United Nations websites, and download the data, and you will see that across the board, the United States has the lowest tariffs on everything from everywhere compared to any country. And the one exception is Mexico and Canada, where under NAFTA and then the revised NAFTA that Trump did, it's essentially almost zero tariffs on everything going both ways. So if he announces reciprocal tariffs, that won't apply to Mexico and Canada because we're already there and it's already zero.
Right.
So these tariffs he's threatening are just to get them to put troops at the border to stop the damn fentanyl.
That's right.
Now, that may work and that may not. But boy, I mean, I don't know if any of you, know in your families. I hope not, or maybe somebody that your children know. I mean, it's one degree of separation. Everybody knows somebody who's died of a fentanyl overdose.
Right.
We got to fix this, man,
Right.
and we got to use the weapons that we can find to fix it. And I'd rather not use the weapons that fire bullets.
Right. Well,
So that's what's going on with tariffs.
That's right. And in the fact that you're bringing this up, okay, because trying to message that out and trying to deliver that out when we're being bombarded by all these sources that are telling us the opposite of that. And when you really look down and you break it down to the granular level, okay, if we did have any tariffs really impact, it's not going to impact the macro level, it's going to be the micro level.
Right.
Okay.
So true.
And the other thing that's going to be discussed and nobody wants to talk about is, 50% of our imports are related party trades. So you literally have companies who are literally trading between themselves just across different borders, and they're going to have to decide what they're going to do with that anyway. Are they going to eat that
Right.
tariff, or are they going to pass that along? So it's
Well, yeah. And by the way, there's a third possibility, which is that the let's say we put a tariff on China of 10% on something or other. The Chinese company could just lower its price by 10%. So
right.
that's another way of eating it.
That's right.
Now, Trump, always has a slogan for everything, and he says, "Well, we're going to make China pay the tariffs." Okay, well, actually, maybe yes. We're not sure. But one thing we do know is we do have some experience with higher tariffs that Trump put in place across 2018, 2019, and we can see what revenues they generated. We can see how they affected inflation. We can see how they affected the exchange rate of the US dollar, how they affected economic growth, how they affected anything, the trade deficit for that matter. And you know what? They had no effect at all. No, in fact, everything was unchanged after the tariffs were put on than before. Growth was the same, inflation was the same, the trade deficit actually got slightly worse. The US dollar was the same. Now, in the case of the steel and aluminum tariffs that were put in place that was the first of the Trump tariffs in January of 2018. A year later, the US prices of steel and aluminum were lower. So these are complicated, complicated things. So we not only really know what Trump's going to end up doing, we don't know how other nations are going to respond. What little we do know is that it doesn't seem to make a macro difference for the whole economy. You got it right. Oh, sure, there's some one company that imports something from somewhere who isn't going to like this.
Yeah.
Right.
If you think about it, though, absent our relationship with Mexico and China, Mexico and Canada, um, our primary exports to reduce those trade imbalances, agriculture and energy.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think the possibility that making at least between Europe and China, making those imbalances a little bit less than they are now? Is there an opportunity there? Or you think it's not really reasonable to expect we're going to be able to, export our way out of this trade imbalance?
Well, that's a really smart and extremely complicated question. It has uh, the United States. It only became legal for the United States to export crude oil in 2015.
Yep.
Right, that became illegal during the sequence of oil crises in the 70s because it was just seen as this precious, national emergency
Yep.
resource. We didn't want to let it go. So in 2015, that changed, and the U.S. is not a net exporter of crude, but it's almost a tie. We almost export as much as we import. It's really amazing how quickly it's come in 9 years, and we're really really good at it, and that's why. We can sell at a competitive price. We have great shipping infrastructure. We just do everything right. Now, there are things that we could do to make it better. So, under the Biden administration, our capability to export liquefied natural gas has basically gone down into a zero growth mode,
Mhm.
where all the permitting has been yanked for the liquefaction facilities at the ports that are necessary to put the LNG on the ships to send to, places like Germany that we'd rather not have get it from Russia.
Mhm.
Now, right now, the wealth that the United States has in natural gas is so extravagant. It is in such an amazing glut that so I'm speaking to you from Dallas. So if you just get in a car and drive west 4 hours, you'll be in Midland and Odessa, where like every 3 or 4 blocks, you will see some tower with
Mhm.
flame spewing out of it. That's natural gas that is a byproduct of fracking for oil that they're doing. And they have so much of it, and there's nothing to do with it. They simply set it on fire and give it as a free gift to God 24 hours a day. That could be going to Germany. That could be going to the billion people in Central Asia and Africa, a billion souls who in this year, 2025, heat their homes with wood.
Mhm.
It's so I said earlier, we're at the very peak of human liberty and prosperity. Oh yeah, but we got a billion people we still got to lift up, okay? When you heat your house with wood, not only do you spend half your day foraging for wood, so chances are you're not going to be inventing artificial intelligence or something because you don't have enough time. You're also going to die at age 40 of emphysema.
That's right.
Now, it also, oddly enough, it so happens that when you burn wood, you have a worse carbon
Oh,
footprint
yeah.
than if you were just to burn coal in your living room.
Yep.
And you cut down a tree that was absorbing CO2.
Mhm.
So it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the environmentalists. It doesn't help the only thing good is your house doesn't freeze.
That's
So we could bring these people into the 21st century by simply sending them LNG. And oh, just by coincidence, we'd improve their carbon footprint. Now, our new energy secretary, Chris Wright, who was just approved last week,
Mhm.
so this is an example of the Trump deregulatory agenda that's going to make us a more powerful exporter and just simply create growth in every dimension, even if exporting weren't part of the consideration. So this guy is the former CEO of Liberty Energy. He's also one of these energy visionaries. So he is the one from whom I learned the statistic about the billion people who heat their homes with wood.
Mhm.
So he says, do not tell me about zero emissions. Tell me about zero poverty.
Mhm.
When I see those flares in Odessa, Texas, I know I have the solution to global poverty.
right.
So all you humanitarians out there, what's wrong with you? You know, how do you feed yourself?
Right.
That's stupid. Do
That's
you
right.
not want to ship that gas to these poor
Yep.
souls who are going to die at age 40 in their wood heated homes?
Yep.
Okay, this is just so easy.
Yep.
And oh, by coincidence, the growth that would happen in this country if we did that. So not only are we selling the materials which we're already mining them.
Yep.
We're just throwing them away.
Yep.
So
And
you don't
there's
have to pay, you don't have to pay to mine them,
right.
right? I'm this is free money that's laying on the table.
Right. And
And we
there's
now have an administration that'll let us pick it up
that's
and
right.
save the world at the same time.
That's right. And there's enough data already out there that it collaborates what you're saying, that as the emerging world continues to develop and becomes the developed world, the demand for energy that they're going to need as they continue to emerge and develop,
Yes.
even if the developed world continues to become even more energy efficient,
Right.
the energy demand across the globe over the
Right.
next 40 years is going
Yep.
to maintain itself.
Yep.
It's going to maintain itself. And
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it's going to maintain itself. So
Yeah, and there are other there are corollaries to that where in many domains when something it can be produced more efficiently, it can be sold more cheaply, and when something can be sold more cheaply, the consumer can buy more of it. So remember back in the 1960s when Gordon Moore created Moore's Law, where he
Mhm.
said that
Yep.
semiconductor cost effectiveness would double every 2 years. Well, unfortunately, he was wrong. It doubled every 18 months.
that's right.
And it did so for half a century. And now that we moved into the cloud, it's doing that again. That has made units of data processing, whether they're in the cloud or in the form of your Apple Watch, essentially free. Now, kind of naive economists would say, well, how can anybody make any money on something that's free? Well, only the biggest, richest companies in the world and their founders. It's funny, they're all giving it away free, and yet they're centibillionaires. How'd that happen?
Mhm.
Well, the reason it happened is because you can't tell how many people are going to use a bridge across the river if you build it by looking at the number of people today who are swimming across the river. You build that bridge, thousands will use it. It's
Yep.
like one guy swimming. So you make energy cheaper, people will use more energy. So right now, the great consumer of energy are all these giant data centers, right? Now, those data centers are being built like crazy, and companies like Microsoft that are building them are doing desperate things to get more energy. So I'm sure everyone on this call knows Microsoft has this initiative to light up 3 Mile Island again. Two of its three reactors are fine.
Yeah.
So you just make sure you know which two they are, But
Don't make a
but
mistake.
the amount of power that these uh, data centers use, it's incomprehensible. Now, some of these large data centers, and again, I'm speaking to you from Dallas. We're building tons of them right around Dallas and all over Texas because land is cheap and it's easy to build things here. Um, they are incredibly efficient. They use tons of energy, But for what they do, for their data processing power, which we've gotten better at, they're very efficient. They use a lot of energy, but they're efficient at what they use. So a Texas-style data center, if it were built at the efficiency that was possible in 1980, so sit down, it would use all the electricity in the United States,
Wow.
Wow.
one data center.
Wow.
But over 45 years, we've gotten so efficient that you can build the biggest data centers in the world and basically just call up your local utility and said, I'd like you to run a line out here.
Okay.
Now, this is one of those things where if everybody does that, they're going to run out of lines to run out there.
Mhm.
So we desperately need more energy. We need reliable energy because these data centers cannot go down. So try telling your daughter that Instagram isn't working today.
Right. That's
Okay,
right.
you'd have violence in the streets. So it's not going to be wind. It's not going to be solar. Maybe it'll be nuclear. Wait 5 years. But it's oil, it's gas, and yes, it's coal. It's the things we have an infinite supply of. We know exactly how to do it here in the United States.
Right.
Oil as a power medium was discovered in the United States. It was discovered in 1859 in Titusville, Pennsylvania by Colonel Drake. And we've been getting better at it every year.
That's right. That's right. So it's probably a good time to pivot, Mark. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, the next, I think the next pressing topic, certainly more recently, inflation seemingly becoming more sticky. We had a data point yesterday, a revised data point today. And so maybe give some commentary on that, maybe your outlook now. I mean, if you look at the Fed fund futures, we don't see a three handle until June of next year, which is pretty incredible transition over the past 2 months, at least from an expectation standpoint. Like, so where do you kind of see interest rates trending and sort of Fed policy and given all the backdrop of tariffs or inflationary or not? I mean, it's a very again a very complicated topic, but maybe you break it down.
Okay, it's a super complicated topic, and there's one dimension of it that I'll get to that I think kind of in some ways unifies it all. The Fed is definitely setting its policy sights on the idea that there will be tariffs and that they will be inflationary. Now, when Jay Powell speaks at the press conferences after the FOMC meetings, he says they're not, but then they publish the minutes of the meeting and it says they are. Okay, I don't know which is true. I'm just going to assume that what you put in writing is probably more likely to be true, but there is just this knee-jerk belief that tariffs cause inflation, except there's absolutely no historical evidence for it. None, zero. So the Fed may make statements and put up their dots to tell you what their future path of the Fed funds rate is going to be based on an assumption, A, that there'll be tariffs, B, that they'll be inflationary. But we don't know what tariffs there will actually be. And history says they won't be inflationary. So if that turns out to not be true, they're just going to move their dots.
Right.
They do that all the time. So we don't let, so going back to what I originally said when we started, I'm going to put that in the bucket of what we don't know. Now, unfortunately, the Fed always pretends it knows.
Okay.
Now, as to inflation itself right here, right now, before any new tariffs take effect, it's sticky, but it's sticky at the Fed's target. Our ability to measure inflation by all these polls that we take, it's indicative. It tells you something. So something like 2.5 years ago in the summer of 2022, when we knew these statistics were telling us that CPI had gone up by 9% year over year. Well, I don't know if it was 8% or 10%, but 9% is a damn scary number. So, that's fine. I like these statistics. But now we're back where various measures of inflation generally start with a 2. And the Fed's target is 2. And they're not right at 2, and they're not below 2. They start with 2. And so we're kind of within the zone where we don't want. So instead of saying inflation is sticky, why don't we just say, good job, Fed, you stuck the landing. That's my idea of sticky. You stuck the landing.
Exactly.
So let's not panic about this. And if we see inflation starting to creep up to levels that start moving outside the statistical bound, like say we get 4% or something, Okay, we'll try to understand what made that so, and maybe we can do something about it. But right now, I don't think inflation is something that the Fed ought to make any sacrifices to deal with, right? So anytime you do anything, there are side effects.
Right.
So if the benefit, the treatment you're seeking is to make inflation a little bit lower, well, you should ask yourself what the side effects are. Is the treatment worth the side effects? You should always ask that question in the medical domain, in every domain. So, and the Fed does ask that question. Now, whole separate matter. Let's say that you will grant me that inflation is just perfect. And until we have to worry about it, we don't have to worry about it. And let's say you will similarly grant me that an unemployment rate of 4% is just perfect. Well, I don't think those are crazy things to believe.
That's right.
I think we kind of live in a perfect world. The Fed has a mandate for maximum employment and stable prices. Okay, you did it.
Yeah.
So if the Fed has gotten the world to where it wants the world, then whatever the Fed funds rate is, it should be at a level that the Fed thinks is neutral. In other words, the economy is doing just fine. So we should just have an interest rate that's like the interest rate that the economy would produce naturally if we weren't this all-powerful institution that was getting in there and try to, master plan what interest rates really ought to be. Because inflation's not too high, so we're not going to raise interest rates. Unemployment's not too high, so we're not going to lower interest rates. It's the perfect porridge. It's just right. So we should be at the neutral rate. What is the neutral rate? Nobody knows.
Right. Right.
Every time Jay Powell is asked, he
That's
said,
right.
I don't know. I don't know. Now, I'm sure we're way above the neutral rate, but I don't know what it is.
Exactly.
Well, then how can you be sure you're above it, you fool?
Exactly. Exactly. My
Well,
question is when did we live in a world where 3% inflation was considered a bad thing? Because if you remember, even 20 years ago, okay, we were all forecasting and living with 3% inflation
yeah,
forecast. So when did
normal.
it become
Normal.
bad?
Absolutely normal. Absolutely fine.
Right. When did it
Absolutely.
become bad? But there is one thing that we also know about. You talk about the world we know. We know that the Fed, okay, the Fed misses. Okay, the Fed missed the 90s. They missed the productivity increase of the 90, which was deflationary. They missed it completely.
Yep.
You just brought up Moore's law with technology, and so they missed that. They also missed a little bit of the productivity bump that happened after the Great Recession that came about in 15, 16, when everybody started buying technology again and started feeling confident again. They missed that
Yep.
productivity bump and couldn't
Yep.
figure out why we had no inflation. So we're in the same dynamic today, I believe. We're missing that.
Yeah.
We're missing that this technological advancement that we're all talking about that's here and we're living through
Right.
that's going to event that will be a deflationary. It is already being deflationary. We're missing that as well. So it's
I would just I applaud. I put my name on that. That's just so right. That is just so right. And we haven't even begun to see the productivity effects of AI. It's
right.
just it's just the first at bat of the first inning, and so it's just a really complicated world. And what I will say is that if we're approximately happy with inflation, and I think from what you said you are, and I think we should be approximately happy with the unemployment rate. Well, why aren't we happy with the interest rate? It sounds to me like 4 3/8 is just perfect. Why should we change it? I mean, how about sticking with a winner? So I'm trying to read between the lines, and I don't want to go all the way to trying to read Jay Powell's mind, but you have to read in between the lines with these guys. I think he and his colleagues are certainly coming around to the idea that the neutral rate is higher than they thought it was 10 years ago when we were still in the immediate aftermath of the Lehman failure and all that other stuff that happened. That's probably true. And they have these dot plots where they say what they think the Fed funds rate is going to be over the next 4 or 5 years. They also have a dot for what they think the neutral rate is. So for years and years and years and years and years in the post-Lehman world, they said it was 2.5. Over the last 4 times they've published those dots, they've moved it up to 3.
Mhm.
And it's going to 4. There's no question about that. Now, that has goods and bads. So there are some people for whom an era of low interest rates, like we had in the 15 plus years after Lehman, is great. So if you're a commercial real estate developer, great. Just give me 0. I might do some stupid things, but but I got rich, so just give me zero. On the other hand, we're not setting monetary policy for real estate developers. We're setting monetary policy for the entire economy, including savers, including investors who didn't like those 15 years after Lehman when Jamie Dimon would just pay them 1 basis point for a passbook savings account. Well, that was great for Jamie Dimon. That was terrible for his 30 million depositors. Well, now that game has completely changed. Now those people, for the first time in their miserable lives, are actually getting some money from their pathetic little savings accounts. Great. It's like a middle class revolution. It's like the way it used to be when I was young. And we're getting that back. But everybody's wringing their hands about these high interest rates. No, no. This is what we call normal. And folks, if you think that era of zero interest rates like we had for the 15 years after Lehman, okay, 15 years is a long time. You can get used to anything. But if you think that's normal, then you're just young.
Yeah,
That is not normal.
that's right.
This is normal. Today is normal.
That's right. That's right.
So you think that based on that sustained sort of, neutral rate, that from a saver standpoint, fixed income relative to other investments are going to be more attractive than they have been in the past, or at least in
Yeah.
the near past, the past 15
Yeah.
years?
Well, yes, but so if you are an extremely risk-averse investor, uh, then yes. But if you're super risk-averse, you'll give Jamie Dimon your money for nothing, just for safekeeping. So if you have a little bit of risk tolerance, as I'm sure you all do, and everybody in your client community does, you're making trade-offs. And sure, those higher interest rates make fixed income assets more attractive, all else equal, in a world in which all else is never equal. Because there's something else that's happening now, which is that growth is better. So, sure, fixed income assets are more attractive. So are equities, right? So everything lives in a competitive equilibrium. So you can't just look at rates. You have to look at the expected return on capital investments that publicly listed companies make on your behalf as a shareholder. So the one thing I will say about higher rates and yields is that if you're trying to put together a balanced portfolio where you want to have lots of growth exposure through equities and you want to have some hedge in the form of fixed income exposure, well, pretty much for the first time in 15 years, that so-called hedge, if you buy long-term bonds, it's not going to blow up on you, right? So if you buy the 10-year now at 4.5, well, I suppose yields could go to 5.5 or 6, and you'd take a mark-to-market capital loss on that, but you'd be locking in that 4.5% coupon. On the other hand, for most of the last 15 years after Lehman, you were buying the 10-year at 1.5. And then when it went to 4.5, you just got destroyed, as Silicon Valley Bank can testify. That's what took them down,
Right.
because they bought the highest quality securities in the world, but at a yield that was too low, and then those yields normalized. And I'm sure these geniuses at Silicon Valley Bank said, "Oh no, this is the new normal. This will last forever." Oh my God, listen to yourself.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So,
Maybe, Don, maybe talk a little bit about how you think the regulatory environment, other than sort of M&A, starting to kick up again, how that's going to help, overall business profit growth.
It's it's great, and it's deregulation is just really the smartest thing that you can do if you want growth, because entrepreneurs there's just people who make jobs, people who make innovation happen. It takes a particular kind of personality, and it's generally not the personality that has it within themselves to go wait in line at some bureau and get on your knees and beg some
Yeah.
idiot bureaucrat to give you a permit if you pay them their $3,500. You're perfectly happy. You want to build your factory, but you just can't bring yourself to humiliate yourself in front of an idiot. Well, you start moving back toward permissionless innovation. You will be shocked by what will happen. In fact, the whole miracle of Silicon Valley, ever since, the 60s and 70s, when, first it started with the transistor, then the integrated circuit, then the processor on a chip, then the internet, now AI, then the desktop PC, all this stuff. That was all permissionless innovation because the bureaucracy had never heard of any of this stuff. So they
Yeah,
didn't know how to write the regulations.
exactly.
Whoever
Control.
heard of this? What's a transistor?
Hmm.
You know? So, but then, now all these things, they gradually become incumbent businesses and they get heavily regulated. So, what are the industries in America, or what are the sectors in America that are most sensitive to deregulation? Well, I would say finance, banking, insurance. These are unbelievably heavily regulated entities. They're regulated at the federal level by multiple overlapping regulators. So I happen to be a director of a very large Texas-based bank. I'm an independent outside director. So I'm at the interface with all of our regulatory interactions. And so, I get an invitation for a Zoom call where it's going to be some kind of regulatory interview, say with the Dallas Fed. On this call, there'll be like 40 people. There'll be people from the Office of the Controller of the Currency. There'll be people from the FDIC. There'll be people from the Texas Banking Commission. There'll be people from the Controller of the Currency. And it's the Fed's meeting, but about a half hour in, after the Fed has told us what arbitrary thing they're going to make us do that isn't written down anywhere as any actual regulation, but they nevertheless have the power to make us do, then the FDIC guy will raise his hand in Zoom and say, well, I have another idea. No, wait, this isn't your meeting. Don, you don't seem to understand. I'm from the FDIC. This is my meeting, and you will do what I say. Now, shut up and listen. That happens like every 3 months in my life. So, Elon Musk's idea with Doge for simplifying financial regulation is just turn it into one big agency that does this. So now at least you don't have this sort of can you top this competition among regulators to get a word in edgewise and make you feel like you did something that day, right? So financial regulation, deregulation is just huge. Now, here's a statistic. So everybody, thinks of, the great banks like JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo and Bank of America and so on. There are 4,300 banks in this country. And the mere top one, so the top five dominate the top 100. The top 100. So now you start getting into banks like Fifth Third and Comerica and, ones that everybody's heard of, but they're like mid-sized regional banks. Those are all in the top 100. They only do 60% of the lending. Now, 60% is the majority. I mean, it's not like a commanding majority.
Right.
So that means there are 4,200 other banks that do almost half the lending. Now, who benefits from regulation? The top 100.
Yep.
Because regulation is something they can afford.
Right.
They've got the income statement that they can just pay an army of lawyers.
Right.
They don't care how long these regulatory meetings take.
That's
But
right.
if you're a little bank in Palookaville, you can't afford the top talent
Right.
lawyers. You can't take the time. Regulation cripples you. So it is a competitive moat
That's
that
right.
JB Diamond puts up between his bank and the rest of the world. And so deregulation won't mean a damn thing to Jamie Dimon, but there are 4,299 other banks that it'll mean a lot to,
Okay.
and that's just gonna change the world. Now, as an equity investor, you can absolutely exploit that. It's obvious how to do it. But a world in which, for the first time in years, so we're coming up now on the third anniversary of Silicon Valley Bank. Ever since Silicon Valley Bank, banking regulation just simply clamped down. They just put the lid on everything. And they basically said to all 4,300 banks, you can't write any new loans. You have to shrink. You can't get bigger. You have to shrink. And so the banks say, well, wait a second. I used to be able to pay 1 basis point on my deposits. Now with what the Fed's done, I have to pay 4% on my deposits. How am I going to make any money if I've got this loan book that was accumulated over the last 15 years at low interest rates? I finally got high interest rates where I can write some new loans that actually make me some money, and you won't let me do it, and I have to pay these deposit rates? That's a formula for putting me out of business.
Right. That's
Well,
right.
that's what's been happening. Okay, except now it's stopping happening.
That's right. Well,
So,
you make a great point because there's, we get asked all the time here, Don, like why did this bank go through 4 name changes in 6 years? Because you get to a certain level of the bank as a bank, and if you're
right.
trying to grow and you're trying to merge, you need
Yep.
to sprint across those thresholds.
That's
You
right.
cannot linger there. You have
Exactly.
to sprint
Yes.
because the
Yeah.
regulations are going to
Yeah.
kill you. They're going
Right.
to.
Now, those thresholds you're talking about, those amount to regulatory tax brackets,
That's right.
where you get into the next one, and all of a sudden, instead of paying a 15% tax rate, you're paying a 40% tax rate. And what got you from one echelon to the next is just $1 in assets.
Yeah.
That was a very expensive dollar.
Right.
So that's the way this is set up, and this can now just run in reverse. So that's great for banking as an industry, but it's great for America as a country that depends to some extent on banks to generate a lot of credit, especially small credit. So this is huge. Now we've already talked probably excessively about energy. That's a huge focus of deregulation. The only thing I want to add at this point in the conversation is to say that demand for energy can be deregulated too. So the Department of the Interior and the Department of Energy are the places where most of the supply side regulation happens. The Environmental Protection Agency is the place where the demand side regulation happens. So a lot of people think that there is an electric vehicle mandate that Detroit and all the other automakers, regardless of what country their parents are in. But if you make cars on American soil, you're subject to these, CAFE standards, CAFE, where you have to have a dictated fleet fuel efficiency standard. Under the Biden administration's EPA, that was set to 51 miles per gallon effective 2031. That virtually means that everyone who makes cars in the United States has to have 35% electric. Well, not everybody knows how to do that. And not everybody wants to buy those. And there's the subsidies, but it's really not making any difference. That's the one and only electric vehicle mandate. It doesn't even use the word electric vehicle. They just say, okay, the one and only way you're going to meet this crazy fuel efficiency standard is by doing electric. Well, Trump's put a new guy in the EPA, and that's just gone. So it's not just Trump saying drill baby drill, where, here in Texas, if someone says drill baby drill, if that's all you say, then I think, oh, really? You just want me to overproduce and bring the price down to zero, so I have to go bankrupt like we do here in Texas about every 25 years? No, 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 no. I'm not going to do that. But then, as usual with Trump, you hear the slogan, but then you have to listen to the next 15 minutes of what he's saying, which is, oh, no, 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 you don't understand. We're also going to deregulate the demand side. So we need you to drill, baby, drill, because we intend to create so much more demand for fossil fuels that you're going to have to drill, baby, drill, and you're going to make a fortune. That's what's happening here. So financial sector, energy sector, those are your two drop zones for the benefits of deregulation as an investor. And guess what? In a world where the S&P isn't exactly cheap, is it? Financials and energies are the two cheapest sectors. So we don't really know what's going to happen with tariffs. We definitely know what's going to happen with deregulation, for sure. We know what Trump did last time. We know who he's appointed. It's gonna happen. We've seen the executive orders. We know it's going to happen. And it's going to have the biggest effect on the two cheapest sectors. Okay, is that a gift or what?
Right.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. We've gotten a lot of questions, sort of talking about, I don't want to, steal your thunder, but should we assume that you're fairly optimistic about, the U.S. economy going forward? And certainly where, economic growth is bolstered by lower regulation and maybe some, pro-growth initiatives?
Yep. I definitely am, but maybe this is the point where it would be good to put the health labels on the can and tell you what might go wrong. Because no forecast is complete unless you look at a 360-degree view. The single thing that could go most wrong would be if we were to try to undertake all these growth initiatives, but find ourselves without enough people to carry them out. The unemployment rate's already 4%. So let's say that Trump succeeds in completely sealing the border, so we don't get any more immigrants for a while, legal and illegal. If we start reshoring business because of tariffs or deregulation or this or that, who's going to work in those factories? Who's going to build those factories? And don't tell me robots. Who's going to build the robots? So you got to have people. You got to have people. Now, it would be unproductive if we were to get into a full spectrum argument about all the contentious issues around immigration, especially illegal immigration. You're going to get no argument from me. If it's illegal, that's a problem. Illegal things aren't good. It undermines the community and trust in institutions. And it's a crime, so it's terrible. But it is a statistical reality that I can prove to you that legal and illegal together, of the 4.5 million adults that have arrived as immigrants in the United States in the last 2.5 years, 60% of them work. So we have grown the economy. We did it by hook and by crook. A lot of these people are illegal, but they're working. They're working. So the fact that they're illegal is a problem. The fact that they're working is a blessing. So if you make it so those people can't come in anymore, well, you've eliminated a problem, haven't you?
Yep.
But you've also eliminated a blessing. This could be very, very, very tricky. We could find ourselves in an America that wants to grow but can't grow. Maybe. We'll see.
Great
Well,
point.
maybe we'll see an uptick in workforce participation, because I'm looking at, sort of your latest
Yes.
data, and there's
Yeah.
quite a large, part of the
That's true.
population that could
That's
work
true.
that is not.
That is very, very true, Mark. There's based on sort of traditional American norms over the last 25 years of who kind of could, should, and normally works. There are something like 800,000 to a million still on the sidelines, believe it
Mhm.
or not. And that's not just a COVID thing. Something like that was true even before COVID. They're just something that's happened in the work culture of America ever since the great financial crisis.
It is, but it's funny you say that too, because as when we were preparing for today's call, I told you I had young children, and
Uh-huh.
what's the message that's actually starting to be delivered into that my children are coming home with is to go work into the trades.
Hmm.
Okay, do you remember 25 years ago that was the message was go to college?
Right.
Go to college.
Yeah.
And so I think as we listen to you talk, is some of this workforce is going to get filled with some of these kids who are going to end up going into the trades and are going to make
Yeah.
very, very good livings
Yes.
that were, 25 years ago were being
Yeah.
steered to go to college.
Yeah.
Uh,
That
and
that's a really, really smart point. And let me just put a little asterisk on it, which is to say that I've just gone through a year plus of a very heavy expansion and remodel of a house here in Dallas. And I've got to know a lot of these trades workers, and I've seen how they're organized. And uh, the the people who run these companies that I don't know, build the furniture and put up the glass and the mirrors and do the painting and everything, they're small businessmen who've put together organizations. They're typical hierarchical organizations with different levels of skill and experience and apprenticeship. And these people who've put these businesses together, they're making as much money as people with a diploma can expect to make at Goldman Sachs
right,
7 or 8 years in.
that's right.
And are there people starting at minimum wage at the very bottom? Yeah.
Okay.
Have you seen what Goldman Sachs pays its new people?
I know.
Less than that, and they have to work 100 hours a week. Trust me, these painters do not work 100 hours a week.
That's
I wish
right.
they did.
That's right.
So yeah, so we live in a world where this is good and bad. Expertise in these things is actually in a shortage. So you want to have highly skilled plumbers, electricians, painters, sheetrock assemblers, roofers, and I'm only talking about the home construction world. There are a million worlds out there. And the kind of money that you can make as a roughneck out in the Permian Basin.
Okay.
I mean, you should I commend to all of you. It's got, it's definitely adult content, but there's an amazing TV show called Landman that's about today's world in Midland and Odessa, Texas, and just sort of about the world of frackers. And a lot of it takes place in the trades world of the roughnecks who actually drill and maintain the wells and the pipelines and put their life in their hands to deal with these terribly hazardous environments. Uh, but these people just are being paid a fortune,
Right.
and they're saving it.
Right. They are. But as we sit here and talk, and as I sit here and think, and we also have a financial college cliff coming.
Yep.
There aren't enough kids going to college, and the population in that demographic is
Yeah,
shrinking.
yeah.
You're going to have like 30 to 40% of of small colleges in this country close. It's going to
Mhm.
happen.
Yep.
And what's going to end up happening is this migration population continues to grow, because they
Right.
will.
Yeah.
And then you have all these folks who are looking for pathways for careers
Right.
that are not going to be able to go to college because they're going to be closed. They're going to make their way into the trades. It'll happen. I
Yeah.
think that's what I think. I think it'll happen. It'll flow
Yeah.
naturally flow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the messaging that's happening. And it's amazing. I picked up on that the other day with my kids. They're being talked about going into the trades. That was not the message 25 years ago.
Yep. Well, as our installed population grows, the trade of all trades is, various kinds of healthcare and home care.
Yeah.
And here in Dallas, there's a complex of public charter schools called Uplift that has done a partnership with the Baylor University Hospital System, where there are now whole high schools that are dedicated to preparing you for healthcare trades work.
Yep.
And so it's like, New York, they have the High School of Arts,
Yeah, the
where
magnet
you go if you
schools.
want to be a ballet dancer. Okay, well, if you want to work in healthcare, go to this school in Dallas.
That's right.
That's pretty amazing. So, maybe talk about, I'm looking at some of our audience questions here, but any opinion on sort of the appointees, the current administration, particularly in Treasury? We had a couple questions about that person's acumen and their different style compared to the prior Treasury secretaries. Any impact you think that they may have on,
Right.
sort of policy?
Yeah. Um, I have to say, I think increasingly with the amount of debt and debt turnover and issuance that the United States unfortunately has to deal with now, uh, I don't think it's a bad thing to have a markets guy be Treasury Secretary. Um, we've had them before, and some of our best Treasury Secretaries have been markets guys. Like Robert Rubin under Clinton would be a stellar example. Um, Bob Mnuchin was a rock
Yep.
solid Treasury Secretary under Trump, and Steve Bessent is that kind of pedigree. Janet Yellen's the outlier. And I'm not here to tell you she did a terrible job or anything, but the question was, do I have confidence in the skill set and the backgrounds and the attitudes of the person in place now? And the answer is 100%. Yes, I absolutely do. I should mention that he's a South Carolinian.
That's
You know
right,
that?
Charleston.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. He's outstanding. So
Yep. He is also openly gay and is the first openly gay Treasury Secretary in history. And if this were any administration other than Trump, that would be trumpeted as just a fantastic social achievement. And I think maybe the nice thing about the current administration is they just do those things quietly and let it be a natural progression of our society.
yeah, yeah. So we're coming to the top of the hour here. So we got time for one more question, Mark, or one more thought question from you.
Um, I'm just looking here, I'm kind of going through here. I think we talked about tariffs, interest rates, inflation. I think we addressed a little bit of the immigration issue and the potential cliffs, pros and cons. Do you think, maybe talk a little about tax policy? And I know that they're trying to get one big beautiful bill passed, but that doesn't seem, especially in the House of Representatives, that's going to be likely or plausible given the very slim margin. How do you see this progressing? And do you think that we get something done, before the end of the year?
Well, I think the whole idea of a big beautiful bill, which in case it hasn't registered, that's Trump give me a little jab at Joe Biden, because remember he had Build Back Better,
That's right.
BBB, Big Beautiful Bill. I have a feeling that the Big Beautiful Bill is going to go the same way as Build Back Better. I think that'll end up being an ironic juxtaposition. But the reason why it will fail is because what they say they want to put in it cannot be passed under reconciliation under Senate rules.
Mhm.
Reconciliation can only handle very strictly defined budgetary items. And so all the border and immigration stuff they want to put in it, it's just not eligible.
Mhm.
And it's just not going to happen. And so it's going to be a medium-sized, beautiful bill. But the one way you could get a big, beautiful bill done is if you were to put in it things where you could get 7 Democratic votes in the Senate and enough Democratic votes in the House to overcome any defections that there might be in the extremely narrow Republican majority. There don't have to be any defections, but there easily could be. There were against Build Back Better. Um, so what could Trump put in there that would get a few Democratic votes? Well, some of the border stuff might. One of the terrible, terrible things about the border is that it's been this for generations, for lifetimes. Immigration has always been a demagogic political weapon for both parties to use. And when you have something like that, you don't want to solve the problem. Having the problem is so valuable as a fundraising tool. Last thing you want to do is solve it. And there are other issues like that in American life, but that right now, that's the big one. Maybe Trump it would be like Nixon going to China in 1974. Uh, maybe Trump is the guy who has the anti-immigration credentials to put a compromise in a bill that would be, so one slogan I've heard is the trade-off will be Democrats, I'll give you DACA. I'll make all the DACA
Mhm.
protected people permanent. We'll legislate that. You got to give me my wall.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, the DACA people are here. So
Mhm.
if you're a conservative on immigration issues, well, you don't have anything to lose because the DACA people are here. Uh, but if you're a Democrat on those issues, then having that made legal and permanent is a real advantage to you. On the other hand, for Republicans, for conservatives, we don't have much of a wall. So that would be Trump giving away nothing to get something, which is kind of his signature.
Mhm.
So yeah, maybe something like that can happen. Now, on the tax side, it's let's say you don't think there are things you can do to get Democrats on board. On the tax side, with the expiration of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, not for the corporate side, that's permanent. This is just for the individual side. So the top rate goes back up to 39.6. The bracket at which the top rate applies goes down, so more people have to pay more tax. The estate exemption goes in half. It's a terrible thing. But there's also a tax cut involved in these expirations. The $10,000 cap on the deductibility of state and local taxes. So state income taxes, property taxes, that goes away. So if you're in New York, if you're in California, if you're in Hawaii, you get a tax cut. You totally get a tax cut if that happens. If you're in Texas, not so much. But that is the problem in the House of Representatives because, with California and New York the way they are, and frankly, gerrymandered the way they are, uh, there are only a few Republicans from those states, but it's not zero.
Okay.
And the Republican majority in the House is only two.
Right.
So there's going to be some guy in New York, some guy in California, and they're going to say, "Oh yeah, 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 yeah. We want to extend all those provisions, but we want that cap to expire." And then, somebody can say, "Oh my God, that'll blow up the budget." Well, that'll be a big debate.
Right.
But let me tell you a little secret. Tax cuts don't blow up the budget.
Yeah.
The 2017 tax cuts didn't blow up the budget. So the Congressional Budget Office that puts together these scores that
Mhm.
tells you how much these tax cuts are going to cost. Well, of course, they did that in 2017 when this was all being debated. The tax code today is bringing in $400 billion a year more at the lower rates
Mhm.
across the board than the CBO said it would at the
Yep.
higher rates across the board. And we want to mess with that? That's a gift. It's Christmas morning. Just open the gift and play with the toy. Do not raise taxes. Cutting taxes increased treasury revenues.
Yep.
Why can't our political class just see the numbers? So that's the debate we're going to have.
It's coming.
I hope I
So,
win that.
well, Don, we were at the top of the hour here, and as always, this was enjoyable, informative. I think if we recap this here real quick, tariffs generally don't really have an impact. We are going to have some real serious conversations around immigration and what that's going to mean for this country. The still some uncertainty around what could play out here by the end of the year with tax policy. Earnings look good, economy's growing. So what did I miss? But all in all, I don't think we're in a really in any kind of pearl conditions here as we move forward. So I think what most people really want to hear is, as an investor is should I continue to move forward? I think our answer is yes, but
Yeah. I have a slightly different answer to that.
Yeah.
Hell yes.
Yes.
We're not allowed to say that. Yeah, but we
Yes.
can say yes.
We can close there. So we can close on that. So, as always, Don, thank you very much. So it's a great, good chatting with you again. And for our audience, thank you for participating. Don is one of the resources we rely on here in our firm to meet and serve your needs. I think it's safe to say we developed a friendship with you. So I appreciate that.
Very safe. Thank you. Same here.
And
Goes both ways. Thank you.
yes, thank you. And we'll do this sometime in the future. And with
I'm
that,
always here. I'm always
thank
here.
you. Thank you. And everybody out there, have a great rest of the afternoon. And Don, we'll talk again soon. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you
Marc, great
all.
job too,
Bye-bye.
Marc. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, guys.